All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I'm Mary Eintema, president of World Boston, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to Chat and Chowder. We are joined tonight not only by the great people in this room, but also a great group of people on the Zoom. I'm having fun with my rhymes. We're so happy to be with all of you, however we are being with you tonight. So right away, we should all thank our wonderful host, Jim DeVellis, and our friends here at Foley and Lardner for their very kind hospitality. I also want to shout out Natalie Mays, our manager of operations and global engagement programs, who is behind the scenes and doing everything to make this event happen, along with other World Boston colleagues. So a couple of reminders. As I hope you know, our mission is to foster engagement in international affairs and global cooperation. So whether they are virtual or back in person or hybrid, our programs probably always will change, but this mission persists. So thank you for being here and for being part of our mission. Please learn more about World Boston at worldboston.org and donate if you can. Next, just second on our upcoming events, April 8th, join us virtually for a special citizen diplomacy program, a virtual coffee talk featuring 3 of the 2022 International Women of Courage awardees in discussion on women's participation in politics. This is a really unusual opportunity, so please do join in. And then on April 12th, I'm so excited about this virtual Chat and Chowder featuring Olivia Seltzer, who is the founding editor of the CRAM newsletter. If you don't subscribe yet, you should. She's amazing. It is a terrific newsletter, really pithy. And only after I've been reading it for several months did I learn that she is 18 and she has written a fabulous book, Cram This Book. So anyway, please join us for that and get to know Olivia. Finally, a note on housekeeping. When we turn to audience Q&A, we're going to ask guests to walk up to those 2 microphones, and we're going to use both so that both of our audiences can hear. Speaking of hybrid, we will take a few questions from the Zoom audience, which will be summarized and presented by our staff. We will not bring people up on camera. We haven't figured out how to do that on hybrid. So please submit your questions to the Zoom Q&A box. And now we are joined by Susan Cohen, who will discuss, among many things, her book, Journeys from There to Here, for the audience in the room, stories of immigrant trials, triumphs, and contributions. So for the sake of time, I'm going to abbreviate Susan's distinguished bio, but you should read it on our website. She is a nationally recognized immigration lawyer. As chair of Mintz's immigration practice, she works with corporate clients to address their immigration challenges. She is very active in the American Immigration Lawyers Association and has contributed to federal and state immigration regulations. Susan helped to lead a Mintz team that worked with the ACLU of Massachusetts and others to obtain a temporary restraining order on the 2017 travel ban. If you all can remember that, that was a very important moment. And as is evident in her book, through pro bono work, she has helped many, many immigrants obtain asylum and become American citizens. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. It's so good to be here. It's wonderful to be with all of you in the room and remotely.
In the room and on the Zoom. So
on the Zoom.
Let us jump right in. It's a very enjoyable read. This is not a dry legal text by any means. It's about the people behind all of these legal matters. It's a very, very personal approach. It reads almost like a collection of short stories. So obviously you have all of the legal and policy background. You could write scholarly verbiage on this. I'm sure you have done. Why did you take this approach? Where are you trying to take us?
Yeah. So I could write those legal treatises, but I actually want people to read my book. I wrote Journeys from There to Here during the presidency that preceded President Biden's administration. And it was a time that was particularly dark and difficult for immigrants, not only in the US already, those seeking to be reunited with families or who had already had approved applications to come here from all over the world. It was really particularly difficult also for people who care about immigrants and defend them and want to protect their rights. So I was very struck. I was pretty mortified during that era, especially towards the beginning, even before it unfolded. The rhetoric that our prior president used on the campaign trail and boldly set out to make policy with as soon as he became, even before he took office, but once he took office, the rhetoric I found to be extremely derogatory and denigrating to immigrants. I think most people can remember some of the things that that particular president said about immigrants, lumping everyone together with a broad brush as, actually people like criminals and rapists and murderers, which of course we know is not true for most immigrants. And I found it to be very dangerous. It was very dangerous. It actually promoted violence against immigrants. And I was really, really concerned that a lot of people don't know the true stories of immigrants, which, come on, folks, we could all be immigrants. Many of us are the descendants of immigrants. They're people just like us, our coworkers and neighbors. And I was thinking about how to dispel some of these really horrible generalizations about immigrants. And I thought, well, the only way I think that I could really impact people so they could see what it's like to go through the process and experience and get to know the hearts and souls of people who have to navigate this very arduous immigration process, regardless of whether they're high-skilled workers, low-skilled workers, coming on through family-based reunification or asylum or a refugee status. They are people with a story. And I thought, I want to try to bridge our common humanity through these stories and let people really see the incredible anxiety that is the life of someone going through any kind of immigration process, no matter what kind it is, no matter how easy someone might think it might be. There's anxiety, but there's a lot of things that our system does to people that it shouldn't do. There are a lot of flaws in the system, a lot of mistakes our government makes. And I wanted to see why people need good lawyers to help them get to the finish line and how long sometimes these processes can take. So there's some stories in the book. There are some clients that ended up taking 20 years for them to finalize their immigration case. That's a whole generation. And living with that fear and uncertainty and still putting one foot in front of the other, showing strength and resilience and courage, demonstrating incredibly admirable values and working hard, contributing to the economy and to their local communities. I wanted people to see that, so I used the stories of 11 different clients I've represented over the decades to show that story, one by one, person by person, and then you can delve into each person's story and get to know him or her for the incredible human being that each person is, and grow to love and admire them and be scared and worried for them, wondering what's going to happen. Are they going to win? Are they going to lose? Are they going to go back to their home country, and are they going to be killed or not? And so I think it's kind of a pretty good read, right? There are a lot of exciting twists and turns. Fortunately, most of the stories end really happily in the book, and that's true for most of my clients, I'm happy to say, but it's not true for every immigrant. Mm-hmm. So that was the background for writing the book. I want to welcome people into the world, the intimate, complicated world, to help grow empathy.
Great, thank you. So is this working? Yeah, okay, good. So about those stories, let's think about that a little bit. One of the things that really struck me in reading the book is how varied the experiences are, how different the people are, maybe multiple advanced degrees or somebody who can't even read. So people end up working with you who are, internationally recognized, for example, Helen, the musician, or Peng, the gentleman who had never been in a hotel, never been in a restaurant, couldn't, because he could read a little bit of Chinese, but what are the different needs that people like that express, and what kind of visas and categories best represent them, and how do you sort that out? Maybe you can talk about some of your favorites in kind of those different categories.
Right. So, there's so many different pathways to get status, permanent status in the United States. And I wanted through these stories to show a variety of the types of different pathways that people choose. So there's some people in the book who were asylum seekers. There are 4 different chapters of very different types of asylum seekers, different parts of the world. There are 2 or 3 different people in the book who were sponsored by family members, like they were married to an American citizen, for example, and were sponsored for a green card that way. Then there is Ghazi, the Kaplani, the Albanian writer, who's an amazing person whose story is in the first chapter of the book, who got his green card. We ended up doing it on the basis of showing that he has extraordinary ability in the arts as a writer. That's a pathway that people can take. And Rana El-Kalioubi, who is an AI genius and came from Egypt to do a postdoc at MIT and started her company out of MIT. And I worked with her before her company was even born to help her found the company. She also did an extraordinary ability. And then there's Jose Salgado from Honduras, who is an incredible educator. And he got his, we processed, we designed his case to take advantage of the national interest waiver green card. So if you can show that someone's work is in the national interest of the United States because it's helping all of us improve, like education in his case, could be in healthcare, things like that. He got his green card through a national interest waiver of the labor testing, market labor testing process that most people have to go through to get a permanent resident status. And then we have Miriam's case. Miriam is an amazing woman from North Africa who had already been doing her second master's degree in the US when she fell in love with a guy, an American citizen, and he convinced her, even though she could have gotten a status based on having a student visa, getting work authorization from that, and then getting a work visa, which is getting really great jobs and really high tech person. She had many opportunities to get a green card through work. But this husband, who was newly married to her, convinced her to give up her student visa. She said, "You don't need that anymore. I've married you. I'm sponsoring you for a green card. Just give up your student visa status and we'll do your green card based on our relationship." So as it turned out, was a con. And she didn't know it at the time, but he manipulated her and abused her terribly and got her to commingle all her assets with him, which is required when you do a marriage-based green card. And then, tried to kill her after ratting her out without any merit to the immigration service and saying that she was just here to try to get a green card based on marriage, when it was his idea the whole time. She had a really, really complicated case, but in the end, she got her status. We got on the basis of the Violence Against Women Act, which thank God we have that law in the United States. It helps so many people. And Miriam is a prime example of that. So there are a variety of pathways to get permanent resident status, and I wanted to show some of the different ways that people navigate those. But I was the lawyer of last resort for many of the people. I wasn't their first lawyer, and many of the people in the book had experimented with other lawyers who they had been told were good lawyers, and unfortunately were not good lawyers. And they had some really, really traumatic experiences, and several of them were on the verge of deportation when I got their cases. And, it was difficult to turn them around, but we found a way.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of very uplifting stories in here. I don't want to take up too much time, but in the same way that the types of visas and the backgrounds that people bring, it seems like the obstacles are of all kinds, whether malicious bureaucrats or simple, just amazingly stupid mistakes, like two guys named Samuel, they had exactly the same name. Yes. What are the chances of that? So tell me about some of the obstacles that you have helped people overcome, whether profound or trivial.
It's almost no immigration case is really completely straightforward. I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to do with the book was dispel the myth that you just fill out a few forms and then you get whatever it is that you apply for, and nothing could be further from the truth. It's sometimes it's straightforward, but more often than not, things go wrong. The government might lose the file. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the agency that processes these applications in the United States, unfortunately loses files with great frequency. And I don't know if you saw it about 2 months ago, I had a story in the Wall Street Journal about 100, 200, I think, 1,000 people right now and filed their citizenship applications in the United States. And the only reason I found out about this and I was able to break the story was because I had a client in this situation. Everyone who filed between February and May of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, some like 2/3 of the people who filed during that time, their applications got sent to this underground storage place in Kansas, and they couldn't access the files. And so their cases are still. And it's like, well, I filed one couple's application on the same day. The husbands somehow made it through, and the wives didn't. So they lose files a lot, and there's very little transparency. It's really hard for people to get information about what's happening in their case, especially during the prior administration. Access was basically cut off to getting customer service information, and people used to be able to go to their local immigration office and find out what's going on in their case. It's really, really difficult to find out where your case stands, and the backlogs are tremendously long. And so people can send in their change of address. If you move until you become a U.S. citizen, every single person in this country who's not an American citizen or a green card holder, even a green card holder, everyone who's not a citizen has to tell the government when they move, so that the government has their new address in case they want to send them a notice. And people fill out these notices pretty regularly and do the right thing, but the government misplaces them a lot of the time. So then they send a notice for a hearing, like what happened in Jackie's case in the book. And many people end up getting called to court for an immigration hearing because the notice was sent to their old address and they never got it. And then they find them deportable in absentia. So people are deported in absentia, even though they have no due process, they never got the notice. These kinds of things happen so much more often than anyone knows. And so it's important for people to understand that oftentimes when an immigrant's case doesn't go well, it's through no fault of that individual's. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunately happens more often than it should.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to sort of the bigger picture about this system, which many people, including you, call broken. Just as a reminder, at one time, the U.S. led the world in refugee resettlements. In 2021, we were at a historic low, 15,000. And then Biden has pledged 125,000. This is pre-Ukraine for this year. The high, where did our high go? Yeah, it was 207,000 in 1980, right? The year that the formal U.S. resettlement program began. So obviously there's a problem of scarcity, yes. Number of slots. What are the first ways to start to improve the system?
How much time do we have?
Okay.
Refugee numbers rise and fall depending on the president. The president gets to set the refugee ceiling every year. And it sunk down to historic lows, as you said, during President Trump's administration. And when that happened, he also cut the funding for the agencies, all the people that work in the different bureaucracies that do refugee resettlement processing, and all the refugee agencies in the US that are the partner agencies that actually do the social work and, and education assistance and, all the community service type assistance to refugees. They had to basically close down because they didn't have any funding because that prior president cut the budget. So there was no infrastructure to process refugees. And that's the situation we find ourselves in now. President Trump's trying to build it up, but we are the agencies and the organizations overseas and in the US that process refugees were gutted. And so it's a process of year by year trying to increase the personnel, increase the budget so that we can handle and bring more refugees into the country. And I think it's absolutely a moral imperative for this country to accept refugees. And I think we should do better than we've been doing. And I actually think we could raise it a lot higher than it's ever been historically. And it would be in our best interest to do that, to lead the world even further in refugee resettlement, because there's 25 million refugees in the world, and we take in 100, 200,000. The most we've ever taken is a little over 200,000. It's really a drop in the bucket.
So actually, could you talk a little bit more about that? It's in our best interests. What are those interests that would be served by taking in more?
First of all, I think a humanitarian imperative to welcome refugees, because it could be any of us, right? If we were in Ukraine a couple of months ago living our lives, thinking, this is your life. A lot of people had wonderful lives in that country, and all of a sudden, like from one day to the next, their world caved in, they're at war. And this could happen to us, it could happen to anybody, but I think we need to be a world leader when it comes to holding our head high and showing that we believe in resettling refugees, because we actually are a country of immigrants, and I hope will always remain a country that welcomes immigrants. And the thing is, we are a big country, and there's a lot of room for immigrants to come and help us with their skills, and across a variety of type of skill sets. And we have a lot of jobs that go unfilled. And so, it's like it could be a really good win-win to bring refugees, do the right thing, I think, ethically and morally, and also help our economy locally, all over the country, wherever they're resettled.
Thank you. You have, this is not a policy-heavy book, but you've got some interesting examples, stories of refugees who became extraordinary entrepreneurs, and how, and some citations about how extremely likely refugees are to found enterprises,
Yes.
which is good for an economy.
That's true. There's a lot of data on that. Immigrants of all types, including refugees, found a lot of businesses. They hold a huge percentage of the patents in the United States, are held by immigrants, first generation, second generation. So there's a lot of data to support that.
So I'm wondering what you are expecting in your work, and more generally as we continue to see large numbers of displaced people. Obviously we had the exit from Afghanistan, and I understand that the people who left are not refugees, but evacuees.
Yes.
We will have, there's 4 million people already on the move from Ukraine, and then more displaced people is likely to be just a fact of life in this century. So how do you see your work unfolding? History from lawyers who are interested in this kind of work.
Yes, there's always more to do, but I'm particularly focused these days on, of course, Ukraine, but also the Afghan situation. And there's been a tremendous outpouring of support and volunteerism among lawyers at different law firms and people all over the country with regard to the Afghans that were brought here by, Project Allies Welcome in August, when the Taliban took over. But what a lot of people don't realize perhaps is that the people that came, there are about 70 to 80,000 people that came and were put onto the bases and then introduced into different communities in the country. They're here on humanitarian parole, which is a temporary 2-year ability to stay, and they're able to renew it potentially, but it's not a permanent status. And so there's a huge expected increase in asylum applications of all these Afghans who came in August, and everyone's scrambling to try to staff up the asylum networks, including locally at all the organizations here in Boston that help do volunteer and low, what we call pro bono or low bono, low legal service fees to help these people. But there were so many left behind, and I have several clients who tried so many times to get to the airport. They had the comms letter, from the from the Department of Defense, because they helped our government. And there's so many people over there who helped us, and they tried to get through, and they kept getting blocked by the Taliban. They couldn't get to the airport. So you think about the people who made it, but think about all the people who didn't make it. And we were in touch with so many of them, trying to help them get humanitarian parole, but something strange is happening. The US government isn't approving their applications, and it's a problem. You might see something from me in the newspaper about that before too long. But
we'll be sure to repost it.
It's outrageous because a lot of the people who are left behind and are extremely at risk are the women judges, teachers, high school teachers, and people are filing these applications with death threat letters directly from the Taliban with their name on it. And the government's sending back to all the different lawyers all over the country are filing these cases pro bono to help these folks. They're sending back rejections saying, you didn't state the facts of your application with enough particularity. I don't know how you can get more particular than a death threat letter with your name on it. So anyway, so that's, we're going to have more Afghans hopefully coming, and then Ukrainians, there's no obvious way right now to bring them here because there's, President Biden announced an increase of 100,000 refugees, numbers for Ukrainians. He hasn't put the actual, steps into place yet. And he kind of spoke off the cuff the other day, so everyone's waiting to see what infrastructure will get put into place to actually bring them here. But I'm counseling a lot of Ukrainians families right now. All immigration lawyers are, and it's really, really sad. So we're seeing them, wanting to come, but not having definitive avenues right now. And that will be developed in the coming months. If everything continues as it's been with no end in sight,
right,
we'll hope for peace. Yeah.
So I don't want to end on a completely depressing note. Something good about this book is that it does not. There's some calls to action, and most of us, although we're sitting in a law firm, most of us are not lawyers, and most of us are not fabulously wealthy. We don't, have several extra apartments that we can hand over. So to improve this overall situation, the bad dimensions of which we've just been talking about, you have some modest but compelling ideas.
Yeah, well, I really think that the only way to change anything is one step at a time, one person at a time. I'm not trying to make wholesale change with this book, but what I'm hoping to do is spark people to take an interest in someone you might not have before, tell someone that you know is from another country that you're glad they're here. I can't tell you how meaningful it is for someone to hear someone say to them, I, for one, am glad you're here. I mean, it seems so simple, but it's really profound. You know, if you know, now that we're getting back in person, if you happen to know of someone who's going through an immigration process or is a recent immigrant, you know, maybe now that COVID is becoming a little, you know, less of an issue, a little bit less of an issue, and we're getting together in person, thank goodness, it's so nice to be here with everybody. Maybe you could think about hosting a little get together at your house, so other people can get to know that person's story, or help them with their resume, you know, do some outreach to try to help them network, get a job, you know, someone who might be looking. And if you have the bandwidth, volunteer for an organization like PAIR. I don't know if we mentioned it, but all the proceeds of my book are going to the Political Asylum Immigration Representation Project, the PAIR project here in Boston, which is an immigrants' rights organization. I'm proud to serve as the president of the board, and I've been involved with it since it was founded 30 years ago, now 35 years ago. And PAIR exists to help immigrants in the greater Boston area who can't afford a lawyer to apply for a political asylum or to be represented if they're in detention unfairly and need a lawyer to help them get bond or to get released from detention and immigration detention. So many people are in immigration detention who have never committed a crime. I think a lot of people don't realize that the majority, the majority of people in jail for immigration violations, accused immigration violations, have never committed a crime. They're just like you and me, but they're behind bars. All they did was ask for asylum. Many of them all they did was ask for asylum, and they throw them in jail. You know, who could imagine that would happen, but it does in this country. So, you know, they deserve representation, they can't afford it. So PAIR is a wonderful organization. There's so many other great nonprofit organizations that help immigrants. So if you have a chance to look at the PAIR website or one of the other nonprofits that I have on my website, susanjcohen.com, I have a list of organizations that you might want to consider volunteering with or donating to, even if it's a modest amount, will really make a difference in an immigrant's life.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we are going to go to questions. Alberto Fierro, our wonderful Consul General of Mexico. So go right ahead, Alberto.
Hi.
Hi. I have two questions. One is, what was it, or one thing is to represent the people that you write about, but how was this this move of reaching out to your former clients and writing about their lives?
Yes.
And the other is, are you optimistic or not about this administration moving on with an immigration reform?
Those are great questions. Thank you so much. The first one is really an interesting question because to my knowledge and to the publisher of my book knowledge, there's never been a book like this before that has so many immigrants' real true stories in a book. Some of them have pseudonyms because the people didn't want their real names. Usually have to protect their identity, especially some of the asylum seekers. But the most fascinating thing about actually reaching out to these clients to ask them if they would like to be in the book is that to a person, they were all incredibly enthusiastic about it. And they were so moved and touched that I actually wanted to put their story in a book. And they finally felt seen and heard, because so many immigrants are so afraid all the time, and they're embarrassed or don't want to tell anyone their story. They don't feel that they can talk about it person to person. But at the end of the day, they want people to know what they've been through. So every single one of them immediately said yes. Getting my law firm to let me do the book was another story. That was quite a process. Yeah, but that's a question for another. The second question is about the Biden administration. I think President Biden has very good intentions for the most part about, the immigration reform and changes that we need to happen. He's trying his best to make a lot of changes. Some of them he's able to make, some of them the courts are actually stopping him from making. For example, President Trump's policy that he instituted called Remain in Mexico, which is forcing asylum seekers at the US-Mexico border to wait in Mexico, even with little children, for sometimes between 1 and 2 years until their case could be heard in a court on the US side of the border. That had never been done before. President Biden tried to stop it, and some states in the southwest of the United States sued the Biden administration to try to stop him from making the change. So there's a lot of things like that that are in the courts. There's a lot of ping pong legal issues going back and forth. In general, I think he has good intentions. He's making some changes, but he's digging out of a huge hole. There are a lot of bureaucratic changes that need to be made, including staffing up, because the backlogs of every type of immigration case right now are they're longer than I've ever seen in my career, and there's a just an enormous delay in regular immigration processing for skilled workers and unskilled workers and asylum seekers and everyone else. So he needs to increase the budget to get more staff, because no immigration system should work this poorly. It's just completely broken down. What used to take 2 months to get is taking 10 and 12 months just to get a little document, employment card.
Okay, thank you. So we have a lot of questions, and we also have a lot of wonderful books. So we're going to balance these two realities. Anne and Noel, why don't you each ask a question, and then Susan, you can do your answer.
Okay.
How's that?
I have a question about our system now. What do you think about going towards, and I don't know the details of the Canadian, the Australian system, a point system for immigrants, and if you have a certain skill, you get a point. If you're this, I don't know the specifics of it, but I know they have like a point system that our system just seems to, not function, obviously, but
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what our system is
And then
exactly.
we'll
But
take Noel's question. Thank you.
Good question.
My question has to do with the level of immigration that you can expect.
Yeah.
Right now, we get it from steady supply of wars, disease, crime, the whole list that you're used to dealing with. But in queuing up is the aspect of climate refugees.
Yes.
It's likely to dwarf everything that we have now, because it'll also increase all of the other causes. More wars, more disease, more everything will be a result of the loss of human habitat. So I ask what you think can be done to prepare for that. And secondly, whether you think it would be practical to get international agreements set on what the level of refugees should be per country, depending on their wealth and area, and whether anything is in the works that might be in that direction and might alleviate these problems.
Great. I'll answer both of those questions. I'll answer your question first. I think you're absolutely right. Climate change is forcing and will continue to force a tremendous amount of migration throughout the world. Whole countries are going to disappear, So yeah, we don't have a lot done yet, but I think we should do more on, in that regard with respect to international agreements, and we should be better prepared to accept more people all over, and it should be fair and split among different countries. Absolutely right. It's just going to be a huge influx and increase in people around the world trying to find somewhere to go, because it's not habitable anymore where they live. It's just a fact of life. What was the other question? The point system. President Trump was a really big proponent of the point system, and many other people are. Canada's system works pretty well, but my personal perspective is that I think that the point system unfairly leaves out a lot of the lower skilled workers who actually come and do contribute to the economy, working in blue collar jobs and landscaping and fast food and all this other. So they wouldn't be able to come Family reunification is not really well addressed in a point system either. Our system is based on a combination of the policy goal of families reuniting with their family members who are, here already. Over time, we have, backlogs for different categories, and it doesn't happen very quickly. Sometimes it takes 5, 10, even 20 years for people to immigrate that way. But I think family reunification is really, really of paramount importance. And I really also think that low-skilled workers shouldn't be left out of the equation. And, we don't just want to bring in the wealthy to this country. We want it to be fair. I think it should represent, the totality of types of immigrants and match, our own country.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to mix in a couple of, I see you, Alex, don't worry. We're going to mix in a couple of questions from online. Sarah's got a couple that have come in.
Yes, we do. We have one from Gail Witherall, who is thinking about asylum seekers specifically. Are there quotas per country for asylum seekers? And are certain immigration courts known to accept fewer asylum seekers than others?
Great question. There are no quotas on asylum seekers. As a practical matter, it's really difficult to win asylum. Although I have to say that, with all the volunteer lawyers who work at the PAIR Political Asylum Project, the volunteer attorneys that work at firms like this one and my firm and lots of other law firms have a 95% success rate with the asylum cases.
Nice.
The national average is like, 20% or 18% or something like that. There are some jurisdictions where the courts are tilted much more anti-immigrant in certain parts of the country, or even around here. Certain judges, it's really judge by judge of different standards in terms of their grant rate for asylum seekers. One of the things I wanted to mention, but we don't have time for a full discussion on every point, is I think it's important for people to understand that our immigration courts aren't real courts. They're not like Article 3 courts, like federal courts. And the trial attorneys that represent the US government often end up being funneled into the judge positions, especially depending on which administration is in power. And so they have a prosecutorial mindset. And the immigration courts sit under the umbrella of the Department of Justice, which is the chief prosecutor for the United States. So immigration courts, by their nature, the deck is stacked against immigrants, and it's not an impartial court. And if I could make one change to the immigration system, it'd be a wholesale change to the immigration court system to make it a truly impartial court system, which it's not right now.
Fascinating. Yeah, go ahead with more Zoom.
Okay, yes. One more from Zoom, from Gabe Adina. This is on a different topic. He says, what do you think of the selective morality or humanitarian mobilization which lay bare the policy of favoring refugees or displaced people from certain friendly countries or communities, while no equal concerns or mobilizations are seen for Yemenis, for example?
It's a valid point. It's a valid point. I think it should be, even-handed, and we should, have a different priority system. But that's a big discussion for another day. But I could talk for a long time about my perception of the sort of tilt of bias in our system, and I think it's not a good thing, and it needs to be reformed. So, but I don't think we have time for that full discussion.
Okay, I have a million questions personally that I'd like to ask you, but we press on. So Alex, who is Alexander, here from our friends at the UN Association. So go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Good evening, first of all, and my question was slightly covered by the question that was asked by our Zoom colleagues there, but it was just regarding the Article 1 potential standings of the court. And I saw that the legislation was proposed by the House Representative of California about a month or so ago to finally move these immigration courts into being independent courts under Article 1. And so I was just wondering if you would have any other thoughts or anything else that you would like to add to your answer on that, about how this could really make a difference in really trying to make the immigration system a little bit clearer and a little bit more efficient in its organization.
Yeah, it would make a huge difference, I think, in the level of fairness, the level of the playing field in terms of the hearings and the proceedings in immigration court. But I think that we're a long way from it. It's going to take a long time to put that into place. There's been a lot of resistance. So I really hope to see it in my lifetime. You know, I don't know how long it's going to take. If it goes through, it would be wonderful because it's really skewed right now. The other thing is that a lot of immigrants have to spend inordinate periods of time behind bars waiting for their hearings, and everything's so backlogged. We don't have enough judges, we don't have enough courts, so hopefully reform would increase the numbers. We have to move through the ridiculous backlog of immigration cases in immigration court that we have in this country. It grew exponentially during the prior administration, but it was already growing before that. You know, there's like, I think 5 million.
Oh my goodness.
It's like really
5 million backlog? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. All refugee cases or
Maybe
immigration?
not 5. It's millions of cases.
All
in-
types. Yeah.
No, it's 500,000 cases in the asylum system that are backlogged right now. Wow. The affirmative asylum system. And there's, you know, more than a million, there's several million, I think, and it's growing all the time. We don't have enough people to handle the court's adjudication process. So and more people were arrested and put into deportation proceedings over the prior administration period, raising the numbers substantially year by year by year, backlog increasing that much higher year by year by year. And so we're really in a hole. So, you know, we really need to reform the system in significant ways to eliminate some of these backlogs, because justice delayed is justice deprived for a lot of people, you know. And, you know, just think about what an asylum seeker has to do to get asylum in the first place, and then what happens to their family members who are still overseas, because that's very common. Asylum seekers have to flee on short notice for their lives, but they leave their families behind, and they can't petition to bring their families over until they've won their asylum case. But when an asylum case is taking so many years, you know, just think about the human toll. First, the family has to try to survive that many years. Some of them are also being hunted. And the wait times are ridiculous. It's just not tenable. Like, I have a judge, right? We represent a lot of Turkish judges. There was a attempted coup in 2016 in Turkey, and President Erdogan purged a lot of people, fired from judges. 3,000 judges were all fired on the same day. And for no valid reason, 100,000 people were actually terminated from their jobs, social servants, and, you know, all kinds of people that president thought were behind this coup, which they weren't. Most of them weren't, but a lot of them sought asylum. And I have a client that I'm representing who's an incredibly brilliant judge who lost his job. His passport was canceled. And he luckily was here studying for a doctorate in law degree. His family had gone back temporarily, so his wife and daughter are in Turkey. We filed his application in December of 2016. It's still pending. And his daughter was like this big, you know, she was like 2 when he left. And, you know, she's 8 now, 9. And even if we win the case tomorrow, it's going to take a couple of years for the family reunification application to get approved. So you think about the toll on people's lives when our system is so bogged down and backlogged. And so there's really human consequences to these things. It's not just data points.
Right. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up with our last two questions. People have been patiently waiting. Why don't you ask, each ask your question, and then Susan can go ahead and answer both. And tell me your name.
My name is Diego. I'm a Northeastern undergrad.
Great. Okay, what's your question?
Question is, how closely does the United States follow like the UN Convention of 1951? Because I'm taking a refugee class right now and I'm learning how there is an international standard for human rights for refugees, but a lot of these times these nations back out and
Great.
they don't respect
Okay.
everything.
Good question. All right, and tell me your name again.
Yes, my name is also Diego, so that's my
Okay.
name.
Dos Diegos.
Precisely, thank you. So my question would essentially be, I'm also an undergrad student from Northeastern, and something that we are very much taught in class is how the foundations of states have to be at a different state or in a different kind of condition in order for certain state to take a certain amount of, to have the infrastructure to take a certain amount of refugees and so on. That I wanted to combine with the question of how, as future leaders, I wanted to ask how it would be possible to create a system in which we could have a strong enough infrastructure and how to use immigration to the advantage of that system so it can actually grow, as opposed to the many arguments that would say that it would either in otherwise shrink. That was my question.
Okay,
I really hope that was clear. It was a lot.
I think I
Thank
we'll see.
go for it.
Okay. Yeah, we follow the protocols from 1951, the human rights law. Our asylum and refugee law of 1980 was born out of that, so that everyone who comes to this country, whether they're processed as a refugee outside the US, refugees are all processed completely outside of the US, and only when they're approved can they come. If someone makes it to the US, they apply for asylum. That's the difference between a refugee and asylum seeker. One's outside the US and one's inside the US, but the standard is the same based on the UN Convention, which is the person has to show that he or she has a well-founded fear of persecution on account of one of the 5 grounds in our asylum refugee law, on account of, a race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political opinion, one of those 5 reasons. And they have to show that they fear that they would be persecuted in their home country. So we follow that. That's what all of our asylum officers, are taught, and they know the law. The asylum officer, the asylum corps, for the most part, is a very good body of adjudicators in this country. It's when people get into immigration court. If you lose your asylum application, if you filed it without being arrested first, you just filed it on your own, and you lose, your case is referred to immigration court. You have a second bite at the apple to try to win asylum. It's in the immigration court that it's much dicier in terms of the outcome. So we do follow the protocols. In terms of how can we build infrastructure, we need to have the will as a country to say to ourselves and to convince, our fellow citizens and people who live in this country and lawmakers that it's something that people value, that we want more refugees. People have to speak up and advocate for it, because right now, that doesn't really happen. We haven't really had the ceiling go above 125,000 in a very long time. And as I said before, I really think we can afford to bring more people than 125,000 a year. But the only way we can do that is if we demand that Congress funds the infrastructure of the people who work at the agencies, both outside the US for the processing and inside the US, to have the bodies, to have the ability to actually process those kinds of numbers, because we're not even processing them now.
Mm-hmm.
So we need budgets passed by Congress that will supply enough funds to increase the infrastructure. And otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Okay, great. So a lot to think about there. I keep thinking, like, people keep coming. There must be a reason for that. So let's keep that reason true. Anyway, I want to say, Susan, thank you so much. What a fascinating book, and it's been a pleasure hosting you. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming. And thank you, audience says, both in the room and on the Zoom, for joining us. We hope to see you on April 8th for the virtual coffee chat with the 2022 International Women of Courage awardees, and the virtual chat on April 12th, Cram This Book with Livia Seltzer. So thanks again to our wonderful hosts at Florian Lardner. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Take care.